Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are excited to have you here with us for this Office of Family Assistance webinar entitled Leveraging Strategic Partnerships and Funding to Address Housing Stability Needs of TANF Recipients and Families with Low Incomes. This is a timely and important topic, and we have an exceptional group of speakers and presenters to share information that you can hopefully take back and utilize for the communities that you are serving so diligently. So thank you for joining, and we will dive right in. Next slide, please. So I think all of us are probably Zoom experts at this point, but this is the portion of the webinar where we do a bit of logistics just to make sure. So we wanted to point out to all of you that there will be a Q&A session for all presenters at the end of the webinar. However, you are welcome to enter any questions that you may have at any point during the presentation by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can see an example on the slide as well. You can also use the chat box for general commentary and other voicing of approval. And to use in answering some open-ended polls. We will be using polling questions throughout the webinar to engage the audience, to get some more understanding about who you are and what you're interested in, and to make sure that we are addressing your needs and concerns. So let's start with that. Let's do a few polls to talk to the audience. And to do that, I'm going to turn it over to Risa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Steve. Our first couple questions are really just going to help us understand who's in the room, who we're talking to. We know with these big rooms, it's sometimes hard to feel like we know who we're talking to, so we're hoping these first couple questions help. So you should see a poll pop up on your screen. You can choose one of the answers, and in about 30 seconds, we will see the results, and then we'll go on to the next one afterwards. And in case you're joining us, the question by phone, the question we're asking folks is, which of the following best describes your organization? We have a tribal TANF program, state TANF program, family services program, housing program, ERA grantee, or other. Give everyone a few seconds for that. And while we're waiting for the results of the polling to come up, I can see that some folks have added it to the chat. So we have housing represented. We have all of the above, which I love. It looks like about 40% of you are ERA grantees or administrators. Another 26% of you are TANF, part of a state TANF program. We have about 3% from tribal TANF, 8% from family and social services program, 7% from a housing service program, and then about 17% of you said other. So you're welcome to keep dropping things in the chat if none of those will pertain to you, but we'll go on to the next poll question. Next slide, please. So the next poll question is, are you aware of housing stability programs in your community that serve TANF or other low-income populations? So your options are yes, there are many, yes, there are some, yes, there are few, or you're unsure. And like the last one, we'll give you about 30 seconds to answer, and then we'll see what the results are. While people are answering the poll, it looks like we have a couple things coming in to the chat. So I'm seeing that a lot of things have been stopped when COVID hit. So maybe one of these was true before COVID and maybe one of these is true afterwards. And then there are some, but the waiting lists are outrageous. I'll give folks a couple more seconds to answer your poll questions. So it looks like about 40% of you said, yes, there are some initiatives in my community. Around 22% of you said, yes, there are a few. 11 said that there are many, and 28% are unsure. We have one more poll question for you before we move on to the content. So this last one in this set of get to know you polls, are you familiar with the Emergency Rental Assistance Program? We have yes, very familiar, yes, somewhat familiar, no, I've never heard of it, or you're unsure. Get about 30 seconds to answer, and then we'll show the results. All right, so we have about 62% of you, which are very familiar, which is great. And then we have 27%, which are somewhat familiar. And then 7% have never heard of it, and 4% are unsure. So there's about, 11% there that we think will probably learn a lot during this time. We're excited you guys are here. So thank you so much for participating in these polls. There'll be more throughout the presentation as we engage with the information from the presenters. At this point, I'd love to hand it off to Gina, our policy advisor on the emergency housing team with the U.S. Department of Treasury.
Hi, everyone. I am Gina. I am with the Department of Treasury. It's good to see that so many ERA folks are on the call. Thanks for joining. And thank you to the Office of Family Administration for having me on this call. I really look forward to this conversation. So I am with the emergency housing team at Treasury, and I am working on ERA outreach. So if you could just go to the next slide. This presentation is designed to give an overview of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program for educational purposes. It should not be construed as legal advice or a statement of binding policy guidance from the Treasury. Next slide, please. All right, a brief overview of ERA. So it's officially the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. We also call it ERA, and it makes funding available to assist households that are unable to pay rent or utilities. And so the funding comes from two different statutes for a total of $46.5 billion. So the first statute is the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which developed ERA 1 for $25 billion, and the second was the American Rescue Plan Act, which developed ERA 2 for $21.5 billion. And so the American Rescue Plan Act actually just celebrated its first anniversary on March 11th, which was very exciting. So the funds for ERA are provided directly to states, territories, local governments. And in the case of ERA 1, Indian tribes or tribally designated housing entities, and the Department of the Hawaiian Homelands. And so if you don't know where your local program is, or you don't know where your state-run program is, each community is facilitating their programs differently. Some are state-led, some are more locally led. There are a couple different places you can find where your program is and contact information. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau actually has a really neat tool to help you find where your local ERA program is, and also obviously there's information on the Treasury website as well. So key objectives of this funding are to support an urgent and an immediate COVID response, to assist renters, obviously to prevent and avoid evictions, and also to alleviate financial stress of landlords who rely on the rental income to support their families. Next slide, please. So just a quick status update of where we are with ERA. So this ERA has reached millions of vulnerable tenants, and eviction filings have remained below pre-pandemic levels. So as of actually, and this says through January, but through February actually, it's been approximately 4.7 million payments have been made to households supporting low-income renters. So that's good news. Over 80% have reached the lowest income households, which is really the goal of the program. And, the Eviction Lab, Princeton University's Eviction Lab recently did a study, and it did show that millions of tenants avoided the threat of eviction in 2021. So in 2021, more households received ERA payments than received an eviction filing. So that also was good news. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over what ERA pays for. And so this is a general overview, and the next slides are going to be going into a little bit more detail on each category of expense. So the first obviously being rental assistance. There are slight differences between ERA 1 and ERA 2. So ERA 1 can provide up to 12 months of rental assistance, plus an additional 3 months, which can be future. And so that's if necessary. So that's a total of 15 months. ERA 2 can be up to 18 months. But the only caveat there is that if you've received assistance in ERA 1 and come back and receive assistance for ERA 2, you're capped at 18 months total between both programs. And so assistance may cover back rent or future rent. ERA can also help with utilities and home energy costs, which obviously includes gas, electric, etc. It can cover other expenses such as internet service, accrued late fees, relocation expenses, and then finally housing stability services. So that can include eviction prevention strategies and housing support and counseling, which again, I will go into further detail in the next slides. Next slide. So rental assistance. In general terms, applicants must meet the following eligibility requirements. So they must be obligated to pay rent. There must be some type of agreement, which is normally a lease, in place, stating that they are obligated to pay rent. One or more individuals within the household has qualified for unemployment benefits or experienced a reduction in household income, incurred significant costs, or experienced other financial hardship. And again, a slight difference between ERA 1 and ERA 2 is that with ERA 1, the financial hardship had to be due to the pandemic. ERA 2, the financial hardship just had to be during the pandemic. So it allows some flexibility with ERA 2. The third eligibility criteria, one or more individuals within the household can demonstrate a risk of experiencing homelessness or housing instability. And finally, an income level at or below 80% of AMI. So programs should prioritize households with an income level of 50% of AMI, and also households that have one or more individuals who have been unemployed for the 90-day period preceding the date of their application. Next slide. So the second category, utilities and home energy costs. Again, this is pretty self-explanatory, but ERA can cover things like gas and electric, water and sewer, trash removal, and other things such as oil, depending upon what how your home is structured. And a lot of communities have really developed great relationships with the utility companies, and they do direct payments to the utility companies when you apply for ERA. Next slide. So other expenses. The disclaimer to keep in mind here is that while these expenses are eligible under ERA, not all programs allow for these types of expenses, and Treasury really gave the flexibility to grantees to decide whether to provide this financial assistance to these categories. Some programs really wanted to prioritize the rental assistance for their community, or maybe housing stability services, and didn't necessarily want to include these because obviously some of these categories can really rack up. So some communities did provide the option of internet service, particularly in the beginning of the pandemic when kids were attending school virtually, working from home. So I know that some internet bills definitely increased dramatically, and some ERA programs offered internet service as an eligible expense. Accrued late fees, again, is something that each program decides whether or not to include. Late fees is usually something that comes in addition to late rent. Again, it can really, accumulate. So programs decide whether or not that is money that they would like to allocate towards for renters. And then relocation expenses. So relocation expenses can include anything from security deposits, rental fees, application fees, utility setup costs. It could also be for hotel or motel stays. And again, it just depends upon the location and the program. Some more like rural communities have used relocation expenses. It's just based upon the community needs and how your community and what your community priorities are. Next slide. And finally, housing stability. So at this point in time, Treasury is really encouraging all ERA programs to focus on how to further support renters in the community by providing some type of housing stability services. It's not always about the direct financial assistance, even though that piece obviously is very important, but sometimes it's also about building that longer term infrastructure and having those additional supports so that someone has that navigation and education assistance that they might need to prevent that cycle of crisis. So we break it down into eviction prevention being the first. So a lot of communities have really partnered with the courts and their sheriff's office to prevent evictions, to do outreach to folks who have received an eviction notice, and then allowed for application for ERA funds in order to prevent the eviction. So there's been a variety of different ways communities have done that, but eligible expenses include landlord-tenant mediation, even legal services or attorney's fees, specifically related to eviction proceedings and maintaining housing stability. And the other category is housing support and counseling, which is really anything related to navigating housing, finding housing, maintaining housing stability, providing case management that really helps folks navigate and being referred to different resources in the community, all directly related to maintaining and supporting their housing. Next slide. Yep, so the main ERA goals for grantees are obviously to accelerate assistance, drive toward access, so being accessible to anybody who needs the program, providing streamlined payment options, for rent and utilities, so building those relationships, developing the partnerships with courts to, like I said before, to actively prevent evictions, allowing for flexibilities, so again, lowering the barriers and having access and really allowing flexibility to help families, and even particularly in some communities who are experiencing homelessness, gain access to this program, and then adopting promising practices. So we have a bunch of promising practices that we have published on our website, and I will go into some of them in just a bit. Next slide. Yep, and so here are some key promising practices, partnerships. And so this is definitely a main theme of this webinar, partnerships with local organizations that are integrated in the community and can provide holistic support. And some of that does, mean TANF agencies. And so there are definitely opportunities for partnerships in any community with any agency, local network, nonprofits. I think we're really trying to encourage folks to, work with each other and figure out the best use for these funds and building a longer term network and infrastructure plan. We've also encouraged using commitment letters, which really helps for rehousing efforts and eviction prevention strategies. It's a way for folks to say, hey, I have, I've been approved for some money, and it kind of helps develop that connection with the landlord and preventing that eviction or even getting into a unit. We also encourage data-driven outreach strategies. And again, I've mentioned this before, eviction diversion efforts. They have catalyzed coordination between local courts, legal aid organizations, community action agencies, etc. Next slide. Yep, so on our website, if you are curious, we do have a page dedicated to ERA promising practices, and this is what it looks like. Next slide. And we also have a page dedicated to FAQs. So pretty much anything that you might be thinking or wondering is probably on this FAQ page. Hopefully it is, but if it's not, you can always reach out to us. Next slide. And then next step. So we're going to continue to work with grantees to improve the delivery of assistance. We do expect that the vast majority of ERA funds will be obligated by the middle of this year. Treasury continues to urge states and localities to dedicate state and local funds and other funds and partnerships to make durable investments to build on the new nationwide infrastructure. So that's why partnerships are really important. And we also have encouraged grantees to take advantage of program rules for state and local to make investments in affordable housing developments. Next slide. And that's it. And I am going to pass it off to Rachel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel William, and I am with the Division of State TANF Policy in the Office of Family Assistance. I am happy to be here. Next slide, please. So, as many of you know, TANF is a large federal block grant program that helps low-income families with children achieve economic self-sufficiency. States use TANF to fund monthly cash assistance payments to help these families, as well as a wide range of services. So many families who are eligible for TANF are homeless or at risk of homelessness or housing instability. We also know that some of these families may not be accessing TANF assistance. So this is where our program becomes key, because TANF's block grant structure gives states considerable flexibility and discretion as they go about determining how they're going to implement the program, how they're going to finance activities and their policies. And states can choose to leverage TANF to connect families experiencing homelessness to services such as housing supports like subsidized housing and rapid rehousing, cash assistance, and child care support. Next slide, please. So over the last decade, OFA has really put a spotlight on connecting homeless families to TANF services, and we've come out with multiple documents working with states or for states to let them know how we can provide these services to families. And one of those publications was our 2013 information memorandum, or what we call an IM. And it was how states can use TANF funds to serve homeless families and families at risk of experiencing homelessness. Again, recognizing that TANF can play an integral role in helping that family's stability. We offer approaches for using TANF funding and providing examples of existing state initiatives, at least initiatives that were available at the time. The IM covers allowable use of what we call NRSTs, or non-recurrent short-term benefits and services. And those NRSTs are designed to extend no longer than 4 months. They must address a specific crisis situation rather than meet ongoing needs. And obviously, a homelessness situation is a crisis situation. It also covers allowable employment services such as education, job training, job placement, and subsidized employment. And it also shows how TANF funds can be used in coordination with other targeted homeless assistance programs to maximize that impact to coordinate services as well. Next slide, please. In 2016, we came out with another document, our Housing Stability Guide. We aimed to help state TANF agencies recognize again their role, the important role they can play in addressing housing instability, like right at the gate, right at the front door, particularly at intake, for example. We encourage states to use it as a resource to better assess for homelessness at that intake, and also for ideas on coordinating with other organizations like local continuums of care. We provided appendices with examples of housing status assessment tools that TANF jurisdictions can use that were available at the time in any case. Next slide, please. To address COVID and the emergency that COVID is, we came out with another program instruction, or what we would call a PI, so IMs and PIs. And this provided guidance on how states and tribes may use TANF to assist these families or needy families experiencing financial difficulties due to the COVID-19 emergency. We emphasize those flexibilities again that can apply to homelessness, such as increasing cash benefit levels, providing NRST benefits, and also providing online approaches for participants to engage in work activities since we were going virtual. Next slide, please. In 2022, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation published a long-awaited study on supporting families experiencing homelessness, strategies, and approaches for TANF agencies. This was a study that went over a couple years, went into the organization of the study and the implementation. And in 2018 and 2019, to understand how TANF agencies are addressing family homelessness, OPRE and their contractors scanned an assortment of agency practices to see what was going on. There's a helicopter above my head. I apologize for that. The highlights of that report that I believe are very applicable here in this conversation are that local TANF agencies focus on family homelessness in response to state policy guidance. Local homeless service providers like continuums of care and continuums of care and public housing agencies are key partners in TANF-funded family homelessness program implementation. And also, TANF agencies should consider braiding their funding with other public and private funding streams to amplify the ability to help families experiencing homelessness. And so we're obviously talking about collaborations here and resources that are available in this conversation. So I believe that we're following that guidance. I would encourage folks to take a look at that study. I think it's very valuable for the conversation. Next slide, please. So I'm listing out our resources here, all of the publications that I've discussed. These are the links for those if you're interested. And then next slide. That's my email address in case anyone wants to contact me directly. And I believe we're going to go next to another polling question. Thank you.
I think that's me. All right, so poll number 4. Name one benefit housing stability provides to low-income families. So you could use the chat box, not the Q&A box, the chat box, to submit your answer. You'll get a minute or two to do that. All right, I'm getting rental assistance, eviction. Ooh, we got a lot of answers here. Let me get some see up. Here we go. Safety, opportunities, connection to resources, better health outcomes, preventing eviction, rent assistance, homeless prevention, reduces crisis mood, prevent homelessness, increased health benefits. You guys are on it. Stability, mental health and physical health improvement, reduces stress. As a student advocate, helps people stay and succeed in college. Family protection, it helps, let me see. Here we go. It helps confidence, allows them to connect with resources and the ability to take advantage of opportunities, intact families, improves economy, sense of community and support, prevents broken families, saves lives. So all great. Community development. All right. Food insecurity and homelessness. Yep. Okay, thank you so much for all of your answers. I think we have another question. All right, number 5. This is a poll, so it will pop up on your screen. Does your program or organization partner with a housing stability program? You can answer yes, no, unsure, or not applicable. Give you a little bit longer to answer. It looks like we had 59% say yes, 18% say no, 17% unsure, and 6% said not applicable. So majority of you do think that, or that you do already partner with a housing stability program, which is great. Next question. Oh, that was the end of that one. I'll be back later. And here's Sherry.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Gina, and thank you. I can't tell you how excited I am about this webinar topic, because what we're discussing here is knitting together and the potential of knitting together administrators of emergency rental assistance and TANF agencies. Many of the TANF agencies, as folks know, are serving highly vulnerable households in insecure housing. And of course, many of the emergency rental assistance programs are assisting families who could use more support with childcare, employment assistance, case management, and the array of services. So together, I think we could really reach highly vulnerable households and create the holistic interventions I think that we all want. I want to do some level setting, so I want to talk a little bit about the housing needs. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So as everybody in the chat has indicated, I've seen them all go through, everybody is pretty well aware of the housing crisis we're in for low-income populations. I want to make sure that we understand what that context is and what that looks like. This crisis predated the COVID crisis, and it seems to be just worsening. So in the housing world, extremely low-income households refer to those who have 30% or less of the area median income for their household side in the jurisdictions they reside in. So for those less familiar with housing speak, I recommend that you Google it at some point. What is a 30% area median income for your jurisdiction? But as a point of reference, for a family of 3 with an income at 30% of area median income would earn $28,000 annually in Baltimore and $23,000 annually in St. Louis and $49,000 annually in San Francisco. So families on TANF caseloads often earn far less than that. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition analyzes the number of units that are affordable to people who earn 30% of area median income in each state, and the number of units that are available for rent, meaning that it's not being rented to a higher income household. Their updated analysis of this information is scheduled for release on Friday, but their most recent published analysis shows that in no state is there sufficient units for all households earning 30% of area median income. And in many states, they have less than half of the available units they need. So what is the result? Extremely low-income renters often pay more than 50% of their income for rent. Landlords can be highly selective. People with more challenges face fierce competition for the units. And people who are poorer face an even smaller pool of housing options. Beth Shin, a leading researcher in the homelessness prevention field, has long likened the housing market that low-income families face to musical chairs, a game of musical chairs. Somebody is going to be left off because there's just not enough units to go around, and it appears to be worsening as families' incomes far outpace the cost of housing. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So for the poorest families that may be closer to 15% of the area median income, the situation is even more dire. They are often, it's not uncommon to find families in highly tenuous housing arrangements paying far more than 50% or more of their monthly income. They're often resulting in an inability to meet their basic needs. They're often being behind in their rent and being forced to move from place to place. Experiencing evictions, formal and informal, can be common. Families may double up with other households, extended family or friends to have a place to stay, and some may move from doubled up situations to doubled up situations. Over the 2018-2019 school year, homeless education liaisons identified over 1 million children and youth living in doubled up situations and 98,000 residing in motels for housing. Many more children and youth were likely unidentified by school liaisons, but in those same predicaments. Slightly over 500,000 individuals and families enter shelter over the course of 2018, the most recent year we have annualized data, and they predominantly entered homelessness from doubled up situations, not their own leased units. Homelessness does not fall on all families equally. Families headed by a Black parent comprise half of all families that experience a shelter stay annually, and they also disproportionately experience evictions. Children tend to be very young in homeless service programs. Infants are more likely to experience homelessness than toddlers. Toddlers more likely to experience homelessness than preschoolers. Half of children sheltered each year are age 5 or under, and young parents make up a sizable percentage of family heads in shelters. Many of the families residing in doubled up situations, in motels, in homeless programs, or experiencing unsheltered homelessness and are residing in their cars or in campgrounds may also be eligible for ERA assistance, but they will require different partnerships to identify them and will likely require more support to help them reconnect and stabilize in housing. Next slide, please. So prior to the emergency rental assistance and all the innovation that's occurred over the last couple of years, traditionally eviction prevention, homeless prevention programs tended to steer resources away from those most likely to be homeless. Families who were doubled up were not necessarily eligible for homeless assistance. Instead, the resources were steered to those who seemed most likely to succeed if given a nominal amount of assistance. And yet researchers told us if we want to have a big impact in reducing homelessness, we need to steer the resources to those most likely to experience homelessness, most likely to be unable to retain their housing, and closer to the home and to the front door of the homeless service system. So there has been some innovation in that space that predated the COVID-19 crisis and the pandemic and ERA. And the strategies that researchers and innovative practitioners were looking at were using data to refine targeting, incorporating broad screening, strategically locating interventions, and new partnerships across systems to reach those who may otherwise be missed. Next slide. So I want to provide some examples here. During the one strategy is adopting screening questions to identify those at high risk of homelessness within social service programs. One of the more successful interventions we've seen in the last decade, was adopted during the Obama-Biden administration in 2012. All veterans going to a primary care appointment in the VA were asked a series of 2 or 3 quick questions to assess their housing stability. And those who indicated a risk of homelessness were quickly connected to an intervention that could help them stabilize. During the Obama-Biden administration, homelessness among vets, I think, declined close to 47%. Having these screenings was critical, but in addition to identifying, you actually had to have an intervention available, which to date, we haven't had an ability to universally provide homelessness prevention assistance. It's often been prior to ERA. It's often been, unfortunately, a first come, first serve, rather than either making it universally available or steering it to the populations at greatest risk. So the strategy that the VA used can certainly be replicated across different agencies, such as TANF programs or other programs that serve high-need populations. Another strategy is to locate assistance in programs where vulnerable adults and people at high risk of homelessness go for help in a crisis or just to meet basic needs. Obviously, TANF agencies are one of them, where families will have a sudden crisis or emergency and they will seek help from that TANF agency. And so if the TANF agency and the Emergency Rental Assistance Administrator have a partnership, they can respond quickly. Increasingly, homeless service systems are adopting a strategy called diversion, in which they help people seeking shelter identify alternatives to coming into shelter, a friend they could stay with, a resource they could leverage that would allow them to stay in some form of housing and from which they can regain housing. Similarly, domestic violence providers are increasingly relying on a strategy called Domestic Violence Housing First to assist survivors who could retain their housing or quickly exit shelter with financial assistance and advocacy support. This has grown as an alternative to shelter and provides more options to domestic violence programs to assist the people they serve in crisis. Unfortunately, pregnancy and the birth of an infant can be risk factors for homelessness, so partnerships with prenatal programs, WIC offices, and other providers serving pregnant women can be a critical touch point to reach those most at risk of homelessness. Building capacity in these different programs and building these partnerships can also help these organizations and agencies meet their own goals. In Columbus, Ohio, there was a pilot initiative called Health Begins at Home, Housing Stabilization for Pregnant Women. And they demonstrated that housing insecure, low-income pregnant women who received dedicated assistance to resolve their housing crisis were more likely to give birth to healthy infants and reduce mortality. Social service programs, including TANF, can also build capacity with their own programs to assist those on their caseload to overcome housing challenges. In California, there's a series of pilots to provide dedicated tools to prevent homelessness and rehouse people on their caseloads of child welfare, TANF programs, and adult protective services as a way to both further their own agency mission of keeping people safe and improving their self-sufficiency and reducing homelessness. Trenton, New Jersey has a dedicated rapid rehousing program for housing insecure and homeless families that's located inside their TANF agency, for which they received White House recognition in the Obama-Biden administration. The TANF program also assigns all young parents receiving TANF a caseworker who is focused on housing issues, whether or not they report a housing instability as an issue. This is designed to help them establish stable homes. So finally, just using the data of the homeless service systems to help refine understanding of the local risk factors for homelessness, where people enter homelessness from, and the agencies they interact with can help inform the design of interventions for unique subsets of families. So the vast majority of families who enter homeless shelter programs were last residing in a doubled-up situation, not their own housing. To reduce entries to homelessness, resources and interventions have to be targeted closer to the shelter door and to the agency and providers that doubled-up families and families residing in motels rely on. Many of these families may be receiving TANF assistance, and many of them are identified and receive support from homeless education liaisons. Partnerships between TANF agencies and school liaisons could go a really long way to getting these families the support they need, identifying the families and connecting them with the holistic support they need to so that they never have to experience a shelter stay. It also allows us to couple together the services and expertise of multiple systems to support households that most need help. So I am delighted that we have an example of a community that is doing just that, bringing together the ERA administrator, the TANF agency, school liaisons, and a rehousing provider to assist vulnerable families. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
Hey everybody. First, I just want to say to all the people who are in the trenches doing social service work, my heart goes out to you. I can't imagine many jobs are harder than trying to build affordable housing, but I think yours is probably that way. I just want to give you a few kind of high-level details on the program that we set up in Chesterfield. And in Chesterfield, Chesterfield County is in Virginia, and in Virginia, there are only a handful of localities large enough to receive their ERA allocations directly. And our county elected to do so. We made this decision in January of 2021. And so our first allocation of funding was about $10 million. And the reason we took the funding is that we had an existing partnership with a nonprofit that provided CARES Act funding to supplement the state of Virginia's rental assistance program. And so we got our program going about as quickly as our board could approve the use of funding. And we had a couple goals in mind. The first was to keep people who were renters housed so that they would not go through the destructive process, which is eviction, to keep people who are already homeless in a safe environment. So some additions to the homeless shelter operations, adding space to what they had, PPE, things of that nature. And 3, trying to help people who are on the cusp of becoming homeless not become homeless, vis-a-vis those flexible funds that you heard about for helping people either exit a housing situation or have the money to get into a new, more stable type of housing. So to that end, we did all that by having some partnerships in place, but also through conveying this message that reducing homelessness was good for lowering the overall rate of transmission of COVID in our county, as well as helping keep our local economy stable. And Chesterfield is a suburban county, and our program has funded over 600 different landlords, and that's for about 7,500 individuals and about 2,500 different households. So we've got a 4-to-1, 5-to-1 landlord to tenant situation. So a lot of that money is going to stay in our local economy. It would have been felt if people were unable to pay rent. So to that end, we created 3 programs. One to do basically rent and utility assistance. We elected to pay utilities because we thought, how could a person who paid the rent live in a place that didn't have water or heat? So we very much opted in to pay what the limits that the Treasury Department put in place were. We set up a program to assist with our non-congregate shelter. And we also set up a program, which you're going to hear more about, to help people who are kind of in that in-between space between not yet being homeless, but on the verge of it. And then more recently, with our ERA 2 funds, we were setting up a legal assistance program to try to help with evictions. So we as a county will be through distributing almost all of our money by the end of this month. And we have funding in place to run our eviction diversion legal assistance program for the next year. But that will be about it for the funds. So I would say there are 2 good things for many of you who've not spent all your money. One, you have a lot of flexibility and ways to use this funding, which the funding that I primarily deal with, CDG funds, does not necessarily allow. And 2, you have time to use it and probably a lot of need to use it. So it's not been hard to use this funding. It's been more a matter of just having capacity and people in place to be able to use it. But we've had plenty of people that have needed it, and it's been great to have, and our community is very much benefited. So I'm going to stop here and pass it over to my colleague Cindy, who will tell you about the Housing Families First program.
Hi, thank you, Nick. Yes, I'm Cindy Musavu. I'm here in Richmond, Virginia with Housing Families First. There is construction going on right outside my window, so I apologize if you hear any background noise. But I just want to get right after it. Thank you so much for having us talk about how we've been using ERA to serve families experiencing homelessness. And Housing Families First primarily is a family emergency shelter. And then also we do have a rapid rehousing program as well. And out of that, we isolated sort of some core values and core skills to do housing counseling for other families outside of the HUD sort of scope of services that we traditionally offer. And, there was a poll a little while ago, I think it was like poll number 5, where we asked you how many of you are connected already with a housing provider, and about 59% of you said you were, and about 35% combined said not so much or unsure. So I'm here to sort of tell you why you should have a housing provider connection in your ERA distribution if you don't already have one, or how to get more bang for your buck if you're looking for some ideas to sort of generate movement on serving families that, like Sharon was saying, can often be missed living doubled up or in a hotel stay. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll give you a little context. So before we met with Nick and got our program off the ground, Housing Families First, I worked in the emergency shelter for several years, and I noticed there were a lot of families coming into the emergency shelter beds that if they had been identified 3 or 4 months prior, when they were doubled up or in a hotel paid for by themselves, and offered some of those housing counseling skills and supports, they would not have landed in the emergency shelter bed system. Imagine yourself on a carousel that you can never get off of. That is sort of what I equate some of the family predicaments that we see, where families are in a hotel stay paid for by themselves, or they're bouncing around in sort of that nomadic family and friends back and forth doubled up stay, where the only option to get off that carousel is to then be literally homeless. They're sort of like nothing else to provide as an alternative to getting off the carousel of housing instability. And as you can imagine, we started to see that, there were a lot of students experiencing homelessness that qualified under the Department of Education's definition of homelessness as doubled up or in a hotel stay that they're paying for, that they were eligible for McKinney-Vento and were McKinney-Vento homeless, but not homeless enough, quote unquote, to be in another housing opportunity or program unless they were in the shelter or had a rapid rehousing referral. So we know this housing hole exists, and I'm talking a little bit about that today. If you want to go to the next slide, as you can see, being on a carousel where you can't get off of it sounds painful, and it can't feel good, and it's not good, and it leads to more problems and more issues. And so for our students, we noticed that school attendance and studying are more predictive of dropout rates than test scores. Homelessness reduces the likelihood of graduation. Not graduating increases the likelihood of homelessness. So we started to set out, like, how can we get to these students, even though they're not quite in the emergency shelter yet, to get this intervention for housing, school attendance, and achievement. So that's where we created the Bringing Families Home concept, and we started to get that off the ground. If you want to go to the next slide. We originally kicked off our Bringing Families Home program as a pilot program with Richmond Public Schools. We had a relationship with their school McKinney-Vento team, their Center for Families in Transition. We applied for a local foundation grant. We were awarded $500,000 to innovatively kickstart Bringing Families Home. And so we did that in 2020, of April 2020. And so for our first year in the pandemic, we launched this program, and we started to serve families experiencing homelessness under the McKinney-Vento definition. So those families that McKinney-Vento teams identified in Richmond Public Schools got referred directly to our agency, our housing agency, so that we could then establish, did they already have a place to go? Were they already approved, or did they need to have housing counseling assistance to identify a next place to go and with what financial assistance they might need? We also then included Henrico County, which is a neighboring, well, we're located in Henrico, but it's another county surrounding Richmond City, just like Chesterfield. And so Henrico was included in that. We got some additional funding, and we work with their McKinney-Vento staff. And then Chesterfield came up about a year ago with Nick and another organization that we were a sub-grantee for the ERA funds. Once we had Bringing Families Home off the ground, it was sort of like, yeah, we could do this in Chesterfield, but we don't have enough. We just had to start with building those partnerships. Who would we work with? How would we get this going? And each locality has kind of looked a little different. In Chesterfield, the ERA assistance, just from the jump, helped us to, we started out with one staff member. We increased to, I think now we have 3 on the team. And we were able to work out an arrangement with Chesterfield Social Services. And that was dynamic because we were able to use those referrals from within that organization internally. They would have CPS or eligibility benefits or resource caseworkers connecting with those families, callers calling in, I need assistance, I need help with housing. And they were able to sort of do that pre-assessment and get those families forwarded to us so that we could then provide them with the housing services we offer. And then they worked closely with the McKinney-Vento liaison out of Chesterfield County Public Schools. So we got the schools on board. And then they had a nonprofit in their school systems called Communities in Schools. And those folks also were able to help identify families and connect referrals. And then across the region, we have a housing resource hotline, that is able to screen phone callers and see, like, do you have kids in schools? Are they in Chesterfield schools? Are they in Richmond schools? What's your situation? What's your need? And to sort of figure out, is this a appropriate referral for Bringing Families Home? And just like that, Bringing Families Home started to take on this whole other scope of practice with families doubled up in the hotel system, or could be doubled up in the hotel, but also doubled up at home in family and friends as well. If you want to go to the next slide, I will talk a little bit more about the partnership with our Chesterfield DSS, but also, with your TANF agencies. Those internal referrals were key because we often, we're not an outreach agency. We are a housing agency that has the shelter and has our other housing programs. So it wasn't that we were getting these phone calls or having these families that were just walking in or connecting with our frontline staff, just cold turkey. So having DSS be able to work within their CPS teams and for other folks calling in and the homeless schools liaisons calling them really was critical in terms of the communication. DSS did not have to do a whole lot of extra work on sort of like getting families housing ready or whatever, but we don't even really believe in that, but just in the sense of like, doing a lot of that front end work. We did a lot of that work, but they were able to at least keep that line of communication open. If our staff couldn't get a hold of somebody that was referred, we'd go back to the DSS agency and say, hey, we're having trouble reaching Miss So-and-so. Can you help reconnect us? Or maybe their situation resolved itself, or they moved somewhere else, or they chose another option or did another alternative thing. So we were able to just keep the lines of communication open. And that's really what it came down to. Who are your strongest communicators? Who are your most accessible people at the table? Nick on this webinar, he was very helpful as an ERA administrator because we could have questions about, this case is kind of funky. I'm not really sure. Does this expense work with this? And, we could ask him questions and he was always there ready to answer. And that was so helpful. And when we ran into some issues with like maybe wellness issues with a family, or maybe they had a few more intense needs that we could offer from a housing standpoint, we went back to our DSS partners and said, hey, we have a concern. Can we meet? Can we discuss the concern? Because we want to make sure that this is the right fit for this household with what we're able to do. So those internal referrals and the specialized support going back and forth between the agencies was really what made the partnership such a success. And then, they had the ability to leverage also some of their case management. So we might be focused on the housing elements of that rehousing work that the ERA funding would do. But our DSS partners would then make sure, are your food stamps on? Did you get recertified? Do you need an ID? Do you need your birth certificate? Some of those like other check boxes that you need to sort of have to keep that family being able to move forward with their plan. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm talking fast. I'm originally a New Yorker, so. Housing counseling, though, is really what we offered in this partnership. So that's why I say for 35% of you who are not yet connected with a housing partner, you should be, because we offer a specific niche. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just get to the experts in your community who are already out there, who already have landlord relationships, who already know how to play the art of the deal or whatever, making negotiations with landlords, offering double deposits, trying to be, leveraging private money with ERAs to sort of get more bang for your buck if there's a credit issue, or I think someone in the chat mentioned the person wasn't eligible because they didn't make 3 times the rent. Well, that may be true on the front end when you start out, but once you get through your process, you may find that you can negotiate certain things around that. I think it was Gina who mentioned letters of commitment. So, we don't promise funding, but we do those projections. We let them know, if you work with us, we're going to put this money on the table. This is going to help this family get back on their feet. It's going to buy them some time for their new job to kick in. All of those things that landlords want to hear to help the relationship secure the housing. We offer assessments on income, rental history, arrears, judgments, and the criminal history. That's the narrative that you need to unpack with every family. A lot of times, I hear sometimes some places will just be like, yes, I went there for some housing resources and they gave me an apartment guide. I love a good apartment guide, but that is just the top of the iceberg in the terms of what families are facing and trying to navigate this market. We have to unpack a lot of times those arrears, those judgments, get the ledgers, make sure that the ERA or other private funding can tackle some of what they have on their credit history. If that landlord is going to say yes, a lot of times we wouldn't pay arrears unless the landlord said it had to be paid in order to move forward into a new unit. This was part of our work in the housing search and placement process. We also, would look for number of bedrooms, arrears, the, desired location. If they wanted something income-based, I saw a lot of comments in the chat. The income-based units the wait lists are astronomical and they're not getting any shorter. And so mostly what we do is market rate navigation. That is very overwhelming and very scary for families. We learned very quickly we'd have to say, if you're needing to move in 30 to 60 days, let's, work with us. We can figure this out. For folks that really wanted to sort of ride the wave to get to their income-based apartment, we respect that. That's the vision. That's the goal. That, that may be a while. You may not be able to sustain this carousel that long. And I understand that that is your alternative to getting off, into some other option. And that, we want to hold that up. But as a plan B, consider what you're eligible for in the market. Let's unpack some of your housing history. Maybe there's an option out there that you can afford that we haven't uncovered. We did the rental inventory, rental applications, going to viewings, making sure the apartment was habitable, utilities, deposits, security deposits, first month's rent. With the ERA funds, what I loved about that was that you could put a couple months on the table that the landlord could work with. I think that because we're a housing organization already, we also had some landlord relationships pre-existing, so we could talk to them and say, do you have any friends that rent in Chesterfield? We're looking for Chesterfield units. This is a market we're not as familiar with. What options do we have? And so we grew our landlord base, which was very great for us. And we also, tried new creative options, trying to pay the landlord incentive. So if you have private money and you can pay a landlord incentive, it's usually the equivalent of 1 month's rent. That you can also sweeten the deal with the landlord, that it's just money in their pocket. Unfortunately, that's just what it takes these days. We can go to the next slide. We would see primarily two different kind of profiles. So when you're using your ERA funding, what was great was that we created two lanes for families. We could get referrals for families who just needed the money, the GoFundMe cash to get into their new place. They already had an approval, but they had trouble securing. We had calculated the average at one point. It was like $4,334 as like the average we have right now in Richmond, just to secure the new place. I don't know about you, but a lot of people just don't have that front money. So it's like, yeah. And also I just got a judgment from my previous place, or it's about to hit my credit. So I have just this unique window to move. And also the market was like what you said, musical chairs. So families had to act quickly, and it was sort of like, or the unit would be gone. The unit would be gone by the afternoon, sort of one of those things we just had to secure. So we used our ERA funding to make sure that we could secure those leases and get those deposits and things, those commitment letters to get those families into their units. So that was the first profile of what we saw. We also worked with the second profile, folks that did need to start from scratch. So, we worked on that as well. I am going to skip to the next slide real quick and wrap us up. Can you go to, we can go to the next slide. I wanted to say that in Chesterfield, because we worked with the school systems and the TANF agencies and those referrals came in, they were attached to students, but because students are attached to families, we ended up serving 198 folks. And we did have 68% exit into a permanent home. If folks did not exit into a permanent home, they went on to another housing alternative, or they chose something that had a wait list. We can go to the next slide, and I'll wrap this up there. I want to say benefits of collaboration. If you can work with your housing provider, your TANF agency, and your ERA administrator, you can really move quickly if you can just get the partnerships at the table. Those took like 5 key people to make sure that things could move smoothly and that checks could be cut and homes could be leased up pretty quickly. And I think that we had a lot of success with that, and we're so grateful for the ERA project that we had. Thank you sorry to rush you at the end. I'll turn it back over to Gina.
Great. Hi, everyone. I am going to introduce Vivian Turner. She is from Franklin County, Ohio, and they have a great TANF ERA partnership that she is going to take a few minutes to tell you about.
Thank you so much, Gina. So I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you this afternoon, but certainly I'm certain that Gina will share my email address should anyone have any follow-up questions that don't get responded to today. So as Gina mentioned, I am from Franklin County, Franklin County, Ohio, and I work for the Department of Job and Family Services. And we primarily provide workforce development and family support programs, basically to cut through the nomenclature. We process applications for Medicaid, SNAP, cash assistance, and publicly funded childcare. So we're the benefit office. More specifically, what I wanted to talk to you about today were the services that we offer through what we call our Prevention, Retention, and Contingency Emergency Assistance Program, targeting low-income Franklin County families with minor children in the household. So these services are traditionally funded with TANF dollars. They're considered short-term assistance. In the state of Ohio, we are required to facilitate and conduct a PRC plan. I should say they require us to do it. All of our 88 counties are required to put together a plan. Those plans will look different for whichever community you are in the state of Ohio. Let me guarantee you that. For our plan in Franklin County, we have always included for years rental and utility assistance, as well as mortgage and tax assistance, with the goal of helping families avoid housing instability and eviction. A family through our plan can receive up to $1,500 a year. Well, you can imagine how excited we were to receive the ERA dollars in our community, because we were easily able to complement those, our existing PRC program, with the new ERA dollars, actually providing services and rental assistance specifically, and utility assistance for families beyond what we traditionally did in that 200% of our federal poverty level. So we were extremely excited. We actually serve probably, on average, we administer probably about $500,000 in rental assistance every month through our PRC program, our existing program. We offer the emergency assistance funds complemented, but they also allowed us to identify other resources for the residents who were coming in for housing assistance. Because we fund so many other workforce training programs, family support programs, if they had another need, we were quickly able to identify other resources that may actually help their families to stabilize, such as job readiness training, workforce training programs, as well as family support services such as substance abuse and treatment if that happened to be an issue. So we were able to connect all the dots for our families who were interested in rental assistance. In addition, we actually streamlined our application process. So we have one application, no matter what funding source we basically pay for rental assistance. The family would only fill out that one application, and on the back end, we would decide how to fund those families to support those families with rental assistance. So that's been a real win for us as well. In addition, we actually took advantage of the ERA's allowability to support housing stability services. We had currently been supporting housing stability services in our community probably for the last 10 years. With the ERA dollars, we were able to add to that funding award, and we were able to provide additional services. Some of those housing stability services included funds for Legal Aid Society of Columbus, and basically we were able to afford them the opportunity to hire more attorneys to represent some of our families who were in eviction court. Win-win for both. In addition to that, they were able to provide legal counsel and advice to prevent housing eviction and handle landlord issues, and also basically to do some training on tenant rights. So very pleased with that particular project ongoing. We also provided funding under the housing stability, ERA housing stability, to community organization called Community Mediation Services of Central Ohio. This agency was established to assist in resolving difficult conflicts. And basically what we pay for through this grant is eviction prevention education workshops, and they are for residents. So if a resident comes in for housing rental assistance, we are able to direct them to these eviction prevention workshops. And I'd have to say they basically say 90% of the individuals or family members who attend that workshop, basically maintain their current housing or we're able to successfully relocate to alternative suitable housing. So very pleased with those outcomes. And then finally, Community Mediation Services of Central Ohio provides landlord and tenant mediation. So if the landlord is willing to come to the table to talk through and work things out with the goal of always preventing an eviction on a resident's record. We want to make sure if the mediation turns out that they need to move, at least we can avoid an eviction notice on their record so that they can hopefully find stable housing elsewhere. And then finally, I think what Gina asked me to speak about was an initiative that we began back in 2019 called the Housing Stabilization Coalition. The coalition is made up of about 14 to 16 different organizations within Franklin County. It aligns public and private resources to prevent evictions and stabilize housing for at-risk families through a collective impact approach. Through the Housing Stabilization Coalition, they have worked on coordinating service strategies to meet the housing needs as it relates to rental assistance and eviction prevention. They have focused on families in Franklin County at risk of homelessness within 60 days. So they really are attentive to those who are most in need. Together, they have developed shared forums, created shared outreach material, and engage landlords by hosting landlord roundtable meetings so that they can share with them new information and resources that are available to them and answer any of the questions. And I believe those landlord roundtables are held at least quarterly, if I recall correctly. And I think that's pretty much it. I went through that really quickly, so thank you, Gina. But again, if anyone has any questions, I can certainly follow up. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vivian. That was great. And actually, I did just have one other community example that was on that same slide. It's from Montana. Montana wasn't able to be with us today, but I just wanted to share some best practices for partnerships. They did work with their TANF agency on a mailing, so they had a mailing go out to all TANF recipients, and it had ERA information on it, which was helpful. So you're kind of spreading the information out on a lower level of partnership. But in general, Montana is a very rural state. And so sometimes that prevents challenges when you're trying to build partnerships and connections. But they've done a really spectacular job at trying to engage each area of the state and share resources. And with that, they developed the Inter-Departmental Housing Integration Project. So this is a partnership between Montana Housing, the Department of Public Health and Human Services, the Continuum of Care, and additional partners all around the state. And they come together and they really share referral information and resources to support folks even beyond ERA financial assistance. So there's that housing stability piece. And they also talk about training opportunities for staff. So even though Montana might not have the level of TANF integration as Franklin County, Ohio, they're really a really great example of just how to partner, even when you're not, geographically close to each other, right? So this is all around the state, a rural state, and they've managed to create this wonderful network with a variety of different governmental and community-based organizations. So just thought I would share that example as well.
So we have a few minutes left. We're going to go ahead and do our Q&A portion. We're going to try to get in as many of these as we can. But Gina, while you're on the screen, I think you answered a ton of really great questions already in the Q&A section. Are there any that stood out to you that you wanted to verbalize for the group?
Let me see. Good question.
I know one that I have here is, can we use ERA's applicant proof of enrollment in TANF as categorical eligibility for ERA? And you had an answer for that one.
Yeah, so with that one, it's difficult for me to answer. It's really up to, program design and the flexibilities that you want to build into your ERA program. Treasury has provided some examples of how to build in flexibilities for folks and for programs when you're trying to determine income, eligibility, and other things. You know, we have encouraged programs to use self-attestation when appropriate without compromising program integrity. So it's really a conversation that you have to have with your ERA program in conjunction with your TANF program, and making sure that you're really not cutting corners, but you're really establishing a process that might be efficient for both sides, but also, you know, ensuring that you are determining eligibility for both programs.
Great. And then any others that you wanted to highlight? And then we'll toss one over to Rachel and Sharon. So I'll have them on deck. But any others you wanted to highlight?
Sorry, I am having trouble navigating this.
It's okay. We can also come back. I know I have like 4 boxes open as well.
No, it's fine. But someone did bring up the question about if there's like a tool or a map that shows ERA programs across the nation and what expenses they do allow and what they don't. Unfortunately, there are none that I know about. But that's something that would be particularly helpful, but you would have to go to your local program and really figure out, you know, what they would allow and what they don't.
Okay, thank you. You're completely off the hook now. Nice work. All right, so if I could bring Sharon and Rachel back on, there's a question: our TANF program won't help people whose housing is unaffordable, quote unquote. This ultimately leaves anyone with no or low income able to receive rent assistance. How can we help them update their thinking on this? Any advice?
Rachel, are you on?
I am on. So a lot of that, of course, is a state call in this situation, and it would be something that would need to be addressed at the state and local level. As far as I know, Sharon, you may have additional insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to take some local advocacy. I think there's a great book by Beth Shin, probably maybe some articles we could get from you around homelessness. You know, but the research does say, you know, if you really want to make an impact in reducing homelessness, or the researchers say, you know, you need to steer it to populations at highest risk and not to those who look more likely to be able to sustain their housing. That's where you're going to get bang for the buck, as it were. You're going to have a greater impact. I mean, you know, I think, and honestly, I think that we developed some ideas about how to prevent homelessness and how to do eviction prevention and crisis assistance, you know, developed in the 1970s, and we haven't rethought them since, and that's like 50 years ago. And I think ERA is, and the administrators and the great folks at Treasury and their partners are really helping to evolve thinking and getting really creative and thinking new ways. And the TANF programs just need to, you know, I think it'd be great to bring TANF folks to the table because they have the clients and a lot of expertise to share. And Treasury has a lot of innovations to share. And I think it's just the potential of a collaboration is great. That's my take. I don't know. Do you add anything, Tina?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
I said, would you add anything about the potential, you know, was there anything to add about the potential of just bringing the great minds of both systems to bear?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is just talking to each other, right? I think a lot of communities, you know, just in general have silos and are in their lane and do really well at what they do. But I think the point of ERA was to really bring about a communication piece, right? Because it's historically communities haven't seen this level of rental assistance funding. And so I think part of it is bringing that financial piece, but also bringing that communication and networking piece that maybe was lacking in some communities. Some not, some already had that infrastructure, but I think that's also the purpose of what ERA is trying to accomplish.
That's great. And I think along the same lines, Cindy, we got a question for you that you answered in the Q&A, but I'd love if you maybe verbally added some context here too. The question was, how do you all, DHS, your organization, kick off your partnership? Could you talk a little bit about that, Cindy?
Yes, no problem. I think, it really came down to a phone call from our partner in who was a grantee of Chesterfield County, because they had a conversation about helping to serve their most vulnerable in Chesterfield, the doubled up in hotels and all that. We got involved because we are a housing partner who is known for serving families in our community and who already uses private funding to sort of leverage what rapid rehousing dollars can't pay for. Just like Nick had mentioned, ERA funds, sometimes they can't pay for certain things. And so we seemed like a natural fit in that case. And so we came to the table and had a couple conversations about, how would this work? How would we identify the families? How would we make those referrals? And really just had to hammer out legality, sort of, if we're sub-grantees, there was the contract piece, trying to get that off the ground, but also in terms of expectations from relationships. We just contacted the McKinney-Vento person, contacted DSS and said, get your leadership involved that needs to be involved. Let's all come to the table and let's just talk about how this could work. And from there, sort of figuring out, what permission do you need? What MOUs do we need? Is there anything your legal team has to review as far as data sharing, having ROIs so that families could be referred on a, general form. I mean, as far as the toolkit for launching referrals and program forms and eligibility, all that, we handled all that because we know how to do that. So that was just our work in it. But as far as building those relationships, just making sure, the schools had some concerns about, what if families don't want to talk to us about their homeless situations? Like, it's okay, they don't have to. But if they're McKinney-Vento, they're obviously meeting some of your scope of practice. So that's automatic. And so you can go ahead and refer them over to DSS. And DSS was the key voice sending those families over to us. And so the bridge was already there for schools to talk to DSS. That's how they met. And then DSS was able to talk with us, and that's how we got the work done. And then we worked with Nick on the grant itself, doing the data reporting, administering the funds, and making sure that the regs were followed and all of that. So you kind of had to have those 4 players, and that's how we did it. But mostly conversations, a lot of conference calls, and then once it was done, and then it just needed some light maintenance, and so that was really great.
That's great. Thank you. So in our last 2 minutes, I'm going to actually pass it back to Steve to close us out. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Risa. Amazing information being shared, and we know that you all are interested in getting your hands on it as quickly as possible. So, as you see here, there will be a recording of the webinar posted onto the PeerHCA website once it has been made 508 compliant. However, prior to that, what we will do is email a copy of this PowerPoint to all of the webinar attendees so that you can have the information to take back to your respective communities. We'd also like to hear from you about other webinar topics. If you enjoyed this one and would like to see a similar deep dive into another topic, please let us know at the email address on the screen. And finally, before we let you go, if you can take a couple moments to fill out a survey that will appear as the webinar closes to provide us your feedback on the webinar and to help us guide future webinars for the field. Thank you once again for spending your time, and thank you to our exceptional speakers for sharing their time and resources with you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.